Welcome back to Unicorn Nation, where we give you a deep dive view into everything happening in the world of innovation, both locally and globally. When you think about your home office or your work office, and all the devices we use on a regular basis, they've all evolved. We all have supercomputers in our pockets, and all of the devices we use on a regular basis have fundamentally changed, except one. We all have a device that sits right by our computer, and every time we need to use it, we say, oh my gosh, I need to print something right now, you need to dust it off, and then you need to hear that sound that we all love so much. Zoom, zoom, zoom. What is this, like 1970? Well, why have printers not evolved? And the answer is pretty simple. A printer needs to be the size of a piece of paper because you have to put the paper into the printer. Or so normal people think. Today we are joined by Tuvia Elbaum, who questioned that thesis and fundamentally changed printing. Welcome, Tuvia.
Thank you for having me, Hillel.
Absolutely. What is the name of your company and what does it do?
So my name of the company is ZUtA Labs. We are a Jerusalem-based company, and we are in the consumer robotics field. Like you mentioned, the first product is a robotic printer.
Okay, so sit down for this. What does a robotic printer mean? What does it look like? How does it work? Talk to me.
Okay, so exactly like you were saying, today printers, the way they're built, you have the paper feeding through the device itself and printing while the paper moves in the device. And when you look at it like that, you have to have a huge printer in order to feed it, in order to have the papers inside them. And we asked ourselves, hold on a second, why don't we make the printer more mobile? And that's how we came up with this concept of a robotic printer. Let's have the ink cartridge literally driving on the paper by itself without the box, and with that we can shrink the printer to the size of an ink cartridge and wheels.
Let me just crystallize and clarify this for those that are watching. If you're in your car and you want to print something, what do? Well, you go to the nearest office maybe and print something. What ZUtA Labs is, and it's just hard to grasp, is a walking robotic printer that's this big. Instead of putting the paper into the printer, you put the printer on the paper and it walks on the paper and prints. Think about that for a second. How long ago did you start ZUtA Labs?
So we started ZUtA Labs a while ago, a long time ago. First as an idea, we developed the first proof of concepts to really raw prototypes. And you know, by us, we always say, if you're not embarrassed by your first prototypes and by your first product, you're too late, right? So we're very embarrassed by what we started with years ago. However, we started with a Kickstarter campaign in 2014. The Kickstarter campaign went viral like crazy. We got some amazing feedback, amazing backers. And since then, we've been working on building this product to give the users the perfect solution that the users need.
I have to say one thing. When you launched this thing on Kickstarter, was there one email that you got that really blew your mind? Because when you launch things on Kickstarter, you see who's backing your project. And there was that one email. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so one morning we wake up and suddenly we see a backing from Steve Wozniak. And you know, you see such a name, you see it online, you say to yourself, okay, it's probably somebody who's not really Steve Wozniak. Either Steve Wozniak for somewhere else or somebody using his name. But then we reached out to that person and we started communicating with him, and lo and behold, it was Steve Wozniak himself. And yeah, we were super excited to see his name, super excited to get his backing. Later on, getting emails from him, the way he described our printer, the way he described our vision was amazing.
Incredible. We had the opportunity to meet Steve Wozniak in Tel Aviv, and he said, well, I'm not going to give any shout outs to specific companies except for ZUtA Labs, because like you said, he was blown away by it. But this was years ago, and now, you know, you got to scale this company. To scale this company, like any tech company, but magnified and amplified when it's hardware and robotics, you need a visionary. You need capital behind this thing to manufacture it, to scale it, to distribute it. It's not like an app, like a software company. There's a lot that goes into building hardware, especially when it's robotics, especially when it's printing, because like we said before, most people think of printing as this old, you know, and so there's a challenge here. And so how does that fit in? Where do you stand in terms of manufacturing and selling and scaling? Talk to me about that.
Right, so like you were saying, let's face it, people like to say that printers are dead. And when a field is declared dead, a lot of people are not interested in it anymore. However, what happened in the past 2 years with Corona, the work from home has started to gain more and more attention. More and more people are moving to work from home. With that, printers is one of the top devices which is making a comeback. We have the printer market going from about $30 billion, where it was a few years ago, expected to get by 2026 to $55 billion, which is an incredible comeback for printers, even though they were so-called dead. And what we had to deal with and struggle with over the years was, first of all, from the technology perspective, right? Creating an autonomous little device that can move autonomously, freely on a large area is very complicated from a technology perspective.
You have to know the edges of the paper.
You have to know the edges of the paper, but also to keep fully positioned in the most accurate way so that every line fits fits perfectly the previous line is something that's very complicated, especially when we're not talking about using any external reference points. These are different ideas in the robotics world. So we had to minimize all this technology in this one little device that runs on the paper itself. So that was number one, overcoming that technological obstacle. Number two was obviously building a consumer hardware company, like you were saying, here in Israel, which is very different from the startup landscape here in Israel. And these are the different things we had to be dealing with, and hopefully soon we'll start moving into production.
I love it. So, this is not your end vision, right? Your end vision is not just to build a printer. What is the end vision? What is the mission of ZUtA Labs in the future?
Right. So if you look today at the consumer devices landscape, there's a lot of new devices that came out in the past few years, starting with the smart speakers, right? The smart speakers, or the devices that try to help us automate our home with the speakers or with the smart displays, different companies doing these things. This is all step one in what we call the home space. Step two will be to have these stationary devices that right now can only operate based on voice commands and do voice command tasks, have them move around and carry out other type of tasks for the user. That's where we envision ZUtA. That's where we see ZUtA playing, because that's what ZUtA is. ZUtA, if you take a smart speaker, you give it wheels, you give it more capabilities, that's what we're hurting, what we call the personal robotic device.
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you all for joining us. This is just an example of how creative and out-of-the-box Israeli entrepreneurs think. It's extremely exciting, and I can't wait to see what they do next. Thank you for joining us. See you next week.